Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'm very excited about tonight. We haven't done one of these in a while. Um, the session tonight, Eric, is this session number 55? Is that what
Yep.
this session is? Oh my God. Session number 55. Joe, before we do your introduction, just so that you know, Eric and I started doing this stuff when COVID hit. Okay.
Okay.
We started doing it when COVID hit because COVID, you may not recall the exact timing of it, but the shutdown in Illinois was right before Whiskey Week in Chicago.
Yes.
And that was going to be my first Whiskey Week as an empty nester. So it was a kick to the nuts when Whiskey Week was canceled for me that, that. And then I called the barracks and we got to do something. And we came up with this. During COVID, we were doing these sessions every 2 to 3 weeks. And then after we started coming out of it, it's like every 6 to 12 weeks, but we're still doing stuff and we do some things sometimes in person, some hybrid. But we love doing these also because the Zoom allows us to do things with people who aren't here in Chicago. And we have people on here from Tennessee, from Philadelphia, from Boston. You know, I don't know if Naperville's on here, but we have a guy from Naperville. We like to joke around with him. But we got people from all over the place. So that's one of the magic things about the magic of Zoom, which is wonderful. Um,
Yeah.
I'm also excited about tonight because one thing that Eric and I have loved doing in all these sessions is introducing people to brands that they may not know. Okay. And we've been doing a lot of craft stuff, a lot of smaller distilleries. And it's been wonderful to learn about those. And you and I met not that long ago, Benny's World
No.
of Whiskeys.
Yeah.
Okay. I stopped by your table. You poured some damn good drams for me. We chatted, and that's why we're here. So, if you could do me a favor and introduce yourself, tell us where you're coming from, uh, name of your company, and what your role is with the company.
I was going to say, wait, before we do that, and before we start this, since we were talking about starting in during COVID and introducing people to our group and people we haven't met before, somebody has a birthday tomorrow that I saw on Facebook.
Who's that?
Uh, one of our non-local people, Ted, his birthday is tomorrow.
Oh, Ted
So
Ansink from Tennessee. Ted, happy birthday. Okay, he's still muted, but that's fine. But Ted, give us a thumbs up for your birthday. Happy birthday, Ted. Thank you, Eric. That is a very worthwhile interruption. I'm sure that Joe is fine with it. All right, Joe, back to you. Tell us who you are.
Yeah, so my name's Joe McEwan. I am the got two different titles, brand education specialist slash brand development manager for Altamar brands in the Illinois market. Basically, all that really entails is me running around like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to bring as much education to our brands as I possibly can and get it as much support as possible.
Okay. And I also noticed on your bio that I saw online that you were or you are a trusted spirits consultant for Binny's. What
I
does
I
that
was
mean?
I was for a long time. I actually worked for Benny's on and off from 2015 until 2022.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what what
Um,
what is a trusted spirits consultant for Binny's?
I was, I mean, just as it sounds, I was actually very trusted by the guys at the Whiskey Hotline crew with my knowledge on spirits. I had a really good rapport with Brett Pontani, Pat
Hmm.
Brophy, Joe Maloney.
Hmm.
Um, my position with them started part-time seasonal at the Bloomingdale store. Then
Okay.
within 3 months, I was full-time in their liquor department, got transferred over to Downers Grove, took over their liquor department there for a couple of years, moved to Nashville for a bit, came back to Chicago late 2019, and they threw me at the Oakbrook store, which is basically what they refer to as Lincoln Park Light.
Yeah.
Um, and because of my depth of knowledge in the category. They felt it's like, they were happy to see that I wanted to go back to Downers Grove, but they're like, we need someone like you and Oak Brook to look over that monster. So yeah, that was the position.
Right, because you from what I understand also it's you're not just a whiskey guy. It's like other spirits as well.
Yeah, started off with whiskey like most people, particularly Irish. Uh, Grew into Scotch and then bourbon. Fell in love with rum. Love rum through and through. Have a strong appreciation for gin, apple brandies as well. I think it's a fantastic category. Does not get a lot of recognition that it deserves. Yeah.
You're probably a Calvados fan too, right?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah, I was just in Israel, and I was at this great bar in Tel Aviv, which reminded me a lot of Delilah's here. And the bartender, every time, like after we ordered a bunch of whiskeys and stuff, he all of a sudden showed up at our table with complimentary Calvados shots for everybody at the table.
Very nice.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, it was great. It was unexpected and it was wonderful, and it was a nice little turn from the whiskey thing. It was nice to have that. And it was fun. So I thought you would appreciate something like that.
Yeah, definitely.
So I do have a very specific question about Altamar. Okay, because what and maybe we'll address this more when we go into the individual drams here, but um does so Altamar, you are essentially you rep these brands, correct? Okay, that's what you
Yes.
said. Okay, all right.
Yep.
So you rep High and Wicked. High and Wicked is one of the brands that you rep. Um,
Yes.
and I'd like to point out to everybody that Altamar brands, they have a list of all of their brands on their website. It's very clear and it tells you a lot about them. So High and Wicked itself, is High and Wicked actually distilling these spirits, or is it sourcing, or is it contract distilling? Like, what exactly is High and Wicked, and how does it work with the distilleries?
So we are contract distilling. Um, that being said, we're not just going to any random distiller and, utilizing one of their non-house brand recipes or anything like that. Everything that we're doing with the brand as a whole, especially with the bourbons and the ryes, is our own unique mash bill that we created ourselves. And then when you get into our singular limited releases, those were our extra age Tennessee whiskey bourbons that we have for a little bit, our Irish whiskeys. Those are sourced, and then we put our own finishing touches on them. And by that, I mean like actually doing our own barrel projects and choosing different types of fortified wines to finish the product in to
Oh, nice.
elevate the flavor a little bit more.
And even the first dram that we have tonight is an example of that, obviously, where we
Yeah.
have, the Irish that's aged in the Foursquare rum cask, so
Yes.
that's an example of that. Okay, so
Yeah.
then, so if it's contract distilling, so you have, a recipe in mind of how you want the actual, the spirit made, and then you identify the right distilleries to
Yes.
help you make that, and then they do it to your specifications, and then they're aged to your specifications too.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, I was curious because that's one thing I couldn't find online. I was looking around and I was typing in is High and Wicked sourced, and I was getting some sites where people were speculating what it was, and I was like, nah, I'm just gonna ask Joe. Joe will tell us.
Well, I mean, for our rye on the back label, it's right there in gold print. We are working with New Riff Distillery for the rye.
hmm Okay, great. And we'll talk about that when we get to each one.
Yeah.
And I'd also like to point out for everybody, and Eric has put this into the comments, that the order of tasting tonight is first the Irish, and then the rye, and then the bourbon. Joe will explain to us why he wanted the rye before the bourbon in colorful language. We will get that from you. Looking forward to that. And when we start drinking the Irish, the first question I have for you, and by the way, people, you can start drinking, start taking your nose, start drinking, do whatever you want. But one thing I noticed very clearly here, Joe, that I wanted you to clarify for us, okay? This
Mhm.
says that it's a single grain, okay?
Yes.
Doesn't say single malt, it says single grain, okay?
Correct.
May I assume that the grain is barley?
It is not.
Okay. Here we
If
go,
it, if
people. We have a curveball. I love it.
yes, if it was barley, it would fall into the single malt category. For high and wicked, well, and I should say there is a small percentage of barley in it. It is a 95% French corn mash bill.
Whoa.
Yes.
Okay, hold
The
on a second. I
corn,
want to make sure that everybody heard that. This is a 95% French corn mash bill distilled in Ireland.
yes.
Wow.
At a very reputable distillery located in County Cork. We're currently signed to a non-disclosure agreement with it, so we can't say who specifically,
Understood.
but we do let everyone know where it's coming from in a
Great.
sense.
So we could
Yeah,
look up on a map and maybe sort of figure something out, but that's
yeah,
okay. But
yeah,
let's go back to this definition thing here though, because it says single grain, but you said that it's 95% that French corn, okay,
yes.
and maybe 5% barley. How does that fit the definition of single grain?
So much in the same way that you would have for single malt. All that the single and the naming means is that it's coming from one single distillery. So it's not a blend of multiple whiskeys from different distilleries. It is a grain whiskey, 95% corn coming from one specific location.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I never expected that I would be drinking an Irish whiskey made from 95% French corn. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That is crazy. The county, you said County Cork, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, William Myers just asked that question, County Cork. Okay. So,
Yes.
so this is essentially a corn whiskey, okay? And this is made in Ireland.
Yep.
How old is this?
So the person that we're working with on this project is a gentleman named Noel Sweeney. Um, Noel was the former master distiller and blender for Cooley Distillery for just over 20 years, if I recall correctly. He left shortly after Beam Suntory made the purchase on Cooley. The reason why I'm getting into backstory real quick is because Noel is a strong proponent of the idea that if an Irish whiskey is younger than 10 years old, don't worry about the age. It's only
Okay.
going to take away from your enjoyment of the whiskey as a whole.
So that's why it's a
Because I,
non-age statement. So it's a non-age statement on purpose.
yes, not because we're trying to hide anything, but because the
Yeah.
person that we're working with says it's unnecessary to the quality of the whiskey that's being bottled.
I mean, there's no doubt that there is a bias in the industry with respect to age. I mean, I remember years ago, Pantani, our mutual friend Brett Pantani, introduced me to a damn good rye from California called Low Gap, and it was a 2-year rye. And it said, and I remember when I looked at it, it's like 2 years, how can this be good? And I drank it and I was like, holy, it was amazing. And then of course, throughout the years, getting to know Brett and having him pour things for us, many of us have learned that a lot of Islas are actually better at younger age. They lose, some of their smoky character as they get older.
Yes.
That's an interesting decision to not have the age on here. But can you tell me how long it was secondarily aged in the Foursquare rum cask?
Yes. So that should be a 6-month finishing process.
A 6 month finishing
And
process.
yes. Um, and the reason why we went with Foursquare in particular out of Barbados is because they're also one of the brands that we import
Right,
into the US.
right, of course.
As this project was going along with Noel, and we had some other expressions that came out before this, he was talking about how he really wanted to do an Irish single grain that was finished in rum casks. And we're like, okay, well, hold on, hold that thought, because we might
We
be able
have
to
rum
work something
casks.
out
Yeah,
for
we
you.
have rum casks.
Yeah. So we went to Richard Seal at Foursquare, who we didn't have to do a lot of convincing. But Richard doesn't really give up his barrels that easily, regardless of who's asking. But once he came to understand what we were going for, he was obviously on board with it. So we went with the Foursquare 2007 vintage barrels. The vintage releases from Foursquare that you see in the US are 12-year-old rums distilled in one single year, aged for 12 years before bottling at cask strength. And what makes it a little bit more unique and to understand how these barrels are influencing the Irish whiskey, and it's going to blow your mind because I feel that the rum doesn't really overtake the Irish in any
No, 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 no.
respect. And Irish can be very delicate.
This is clean. This has the clean flavor of an Irish. It definitely
Yeah,
does.
yeah.
I do get some of the sweetness from the rum. Um, about the rum, I'm just curious. You've been mentioning Foursquare rum. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that tells us about the cask that this was secondarily
Yeah,
matured in.
yeah, definitely. So, Foursquare is based out of Barbados. They're one of the only family-owned distilleries still on the island of Barbados. Them and I believe St. Nicholas Abbey are the only four, are one of the are two of the four distilleries in Barbados that are family-owned.
Okay.
But Richard's process is he uses a traditional twin coffee column still and a double retort pot still. And he'll do his distillation and blend together. So he takes those two different styles of rum, blends them together. Some will be aged separately as just column distilled rum. Some will be aged separately as pot distilled rum. Some gets blended together right before barreling. And they start the aging process in ex-bourbon barrels that are usually 1 to 3 years old. Really depends on the quality of the cask.
And it's all sugarcane? Sugarcane. This is sugarcane?
Molasses, but yes.
Molasses. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So after about 3 years of aging in those barrels, he blends down. So he'll start mixing the barrels together to start trying to achieve a flavor profile based on what he thinks those barrels are doing. So after blending down, he'll then transfer them to say, 4 to 6 use ex-bourbon barrels. Keeps the maturation going again. And then eventually, after another few years, blends down until ultimately the rum is spending the last 3 years or so of its maturation in basically inert dead oak barrels.
Cool.
Something that's just going to help continue the oxidation process without adding any more of those bourbon characteristics to it. The reason for this is because Barbados has a very unique microclimate in the Caribbean. Essentially, it is always 80 degrees day and night and 80% humidity. The only time that changes is in December when it rains.
Got it.
On top of that, their rick houses are open air environments. So the walls will only go up about 3/4 of the way, and then you have some roofing. So all of these barrels are completely exposed essentially to the environment.
Fascinating. It's good. That's that whole thing about the, that makes it a much more active barrel.
Yes.
So that's fascinating. One question I got here from Daniel Pikus in our comments here. Is the initial maturation of the Irish, okay, is that done in ex-bourbon casks?
Very old ex-bourbon.
Very old ex-bourbon. Okay, so this is ex-bourbon and then ex-rum. Straightforward ex-bourbon, ex-rum.
Yes.
I have to tell you, this is a little too drinkable. I have to remind myself that there are other drams coming because I could just throw this down. It's too light. It's too easy.
Are we still there?
Do you hear me? Eric, do you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, he's frozen right now.
Joe's frozen.
Okay, there he is.
Joe, are you back?
I'm back. I lost you guys there for a moment.
No problem at all. No problem. So I don't know if you heard what I was saying, is that this is a little bit too drinkable. Okay.
Yes, it is very, very drinkable.
Yeah.
Especially at 100 proof.
Yeah, that's crazy. This is crazy that this is 100 proof. So hats off to you. This is damn good. Now, is this one of your core expressions?
It is not, but we're tinkering around with the idea of making it a relatively readily available mark in the Hide Wicked portfolio, just based on the reception that it's received so far.
Got it. Okay, got it. Cool. Wonderful. All right, great. All right, so right before our session started tonight, before we turned on the recording, You were answering somebody a very good question as to why the rye before the bourbon. And I told you to stop talking because the answer was too good and it needed to be here for everybody. So, can you please tell us why we're going to be tasting the rye before the bourbon?
Yes, it seems counterintuitive, but with the high and wicked portfolio, we go for a profile that we like to call what the fucky.
What the fucky?
What the fucky?
Is that with two E's or is that with a Y?
It's with a Y. We,
With a
we
Y.
keep it
Okay.
traditional, just the Y.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Huh.
And essentially we're trying to, and again, this is Altamar Brands as a whole, we're trying to challenge perception and expectations of these categories of spirits. So we've got this insanely high rye whiskey, 91% rye, 9% malted barley, that is super rich and has this amazing, just kind of like apple compote flavor to it up front. But
Can I
then you get
stop you
all
for
this
a
great
second?
rye grain.
I want
Yeah.
to make sure because you said something very important because you skipped ahead to one of my questions. So you said this is 91% rye and
Yes.
9% malted barley.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right. All right.
Yeah.
So 91% rye, 9% malted barley. Okay. All right. And so again, why this before the bourbon? Because again, usually people do bourbon before rye.
Yes. And again, because even though it has such a high percentage of rye in the mash bill, it doesn't drink incredibly aggressive. You actually get a lot of sweet characteristic of the rye grain itself. While on the back end of it, in my opinion, you still get some of those traditional hallmarks of rye whiskey. And that's going to drink in contrast to the bourbon, which is going to have a much more dynamic high rye profile to it.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And so this mash bill, this 91.9, is that something the High and Wicked itself came up with? Is that their own recipe?
No, this was our recipe, and this was after blinding 8 different recipes that they helped distill for us.
So this was an Altamar recipe that you
Yes,
worked. Okay. All right. Got it. Interesting. So in your relationship with your brands, you actually take a very active role in helping develop the product, it sounds like.
yes. Very active in that we're again, we're doing the recipe ourselves, but we're also selecting the yeast strains ourselves. The oak for the barrels, we're getting from Independent Stave out of Missouri,
Hmm.
as opposed to just going with a simple barrel regimen. The wood itself is seasoned outdoors for 3 years. This is a lot of environmental exposure to it that breaks down a lot of the tannins in the wood. After that, the wood gets a medium toast before level 4 char. And then we start the distillation process, and both the bourbon and rye are aged minimum 5 years.
I remember tasting this at World of Whiskeys, and I think I remember looking at you and saying, "Damn, this is good."
it
And
is
it
a fantastic rye.
it really is. It's definitely a rye. It's got a nice little burn. It's got a little bit of the sweetness, but it definitely has, a like that richness,
Yep.
and um just the flavor just coats the mouth. It's a full experience. Um, eh, Tell us about the age on this again, or is this also
So,
not disclosed?
no, it is disclosed. It's on the bottle.
Okay,
It is a 5-year-old whiskey,
okay,
but we still have other stocks aging. So the idea is, as the project continues to go along, we're going to start blending in older and older whiskey.
got it. And where do you get the rye from?
The rye is
The grain,
coming
yeah, the grain
from
itself. Yeah,
the grain itself is coming from Brooks Milling, and they're based in Louisville slash right there on the border of Indiana.
got it. And what the malted barley you getting from like Minnesota or something?
I actually don't recall off the top of my head.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, this is, it's funny. I actually, yeah, I'm getting some messages, even some like private messages here. Somebody said to me right now, I normally do not like rye, but this is sweet and delicious. Okay, is what somebody else said. So now is this made at New Riff like the bourbon is also made at New Riff?
So the bourbon is not made at New
Oh,
Riff, but
okay.
the rye is. Yeah.
Okay, so the rye is okay. Sorry, I mixed them around. Okay, so the rye
Yeah.
is made at New Rift, and then so you selected New Rift to make this for you.
Yes. And part of that has to do with a long-standing history with Jay at New Riff.
Okay.
He's been a longtime friend of the owner of our company, Lyons Brown, and just a fan of the company for years. Back when Jay was running the Party Source, he was one of the first people to bring in Tequila Ocho, which was one of the first tequilas that we started to bring into the US. So that friendship and business relationship has just continued over the years. And we just trust them with their ability to distill rye whiskey as a whole because it is a very finicky grain. They have a very strict cleanliness policy when it comes to their rye grain. In addition to just sourcing really high quality stuff, they go through extra process of polishing the grain before they start to mill it and ferment it. I mean, they have an all copper contact distillation process. So every step of the making this whiskey, that copper just strips out all the impurities that you can possibly encounter during that process. And that just, again, elevates all the
Yeah.
sweetness in the
Well, I
grain.
got to tell you that this is delicious. Okay, this
Thank
is
you.
absolutely delicious. Will you always be disclosing the distiller of the rye as long as it's with New Riff because of your relationship with them?
Yes, as long as whoever we work with is open to us disclosing it, we're going to disclose it.
Yeah. We're getting a lot of comments here. People love this stuff. Our resident retailer, Adam, with off premise, wrote the word fabulous, nice and simple, one word. Yeah, this is great. Wow. Yeah, I'm loving this rye. Tell us about the barrels. There's no finishing with this. This is just ex-bourbon barrels, right? Or is it
Correct.
actually, or is it virgin? Like, what are these here?
It's new American oak to legally be called American rye
Right?
whiskey.
Okay.
Yep,
And it's not finished in anything.
correct.
Okay, all right. So this is all virgin oak. Okay, so wow.
Yeah,
Mm, yeah, this is yeah. This might have been the reason why I said, "Give me your card." It's- and World of Whiskeys. This is damn good. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go get a bottle of this like tomorrow. This is on the shelves at Binny's.
the rye is not at the moment, but the Irish whiskeys and the bourbon are.
Okay, okay, that's in the bourbon. Okay,
Yeah,
um, okay, and the
but
aging.
if you hound them enough, they'll bring it in.
Okay. All right. Well, I've been texting with Brett about a few things the last few days, so I can throw that into the text. Say
Excellent.
that we've been enjoying your ride. Is all the aging done at New Riff? All the aging for this?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Beautiful. Mm. All right. I'm almost sad to leave this and go to the bourbon, but you're taking us through this, so you are you are steering the ship. So I have to sadly put down the rye. I'm putting it down. I can do that. Uh, to deal with that, putting it down. All right, I'm good. And so let's talk about this bourbon. Okay, it has to be something special for you to have put it after that rye. So tell us about this bourbon, the mash bill, if you can tell us where it's distilled, that type of stuff. Let's go for it.
So we currently have an NDA on the bourbon.
Okay.
And that's mainly because the distillery that we're working with on this just doesn't want to compete against their own brands, if that makes sense.
Oh, no, that
Uh,
makes perfect sense. Makes perfect
like
sense.
they have no issues doing contract distillation, but they want to focus on their house brand first and
Sure.
foremost, which is
Yeah, that's fine.
totally
Okay.
respectable.
Okay.
So there's a lot of backstory when it came to creating the bourbon overall. And that backstory really starts with the owner of our company, Lyons Brown. Lyons is sixth generation Brown foreman. He used to be the marketing manager for Europe. He used to be the sales manager for the US. And in the early 2000s, ultimately stepped away from his role, which was essentially for him to become the CEO of Brown Foreman. He was the heir apparent and was getting ready to take over the company and decided that he wanted to focus on brands that are much more dynamic. And we kind of joke around that after he started Altamar in 2008, it only took him about 10 more years to get back into whiskey.
Only 10 years.
Only 10 years.
I love it.
And yeah, and it was part of it did have to do with his family legacy. Um, and it had to be right. It had to be the right time. It had to be the right distillate. It couldn't just be anything, any random bottling coming our way. Like this was really, really important to him, and he did not want to fuck it up. So when it came to doing the bourbon, again, it was about finding the right partnerships, creating the right mash bill, but ultimately creating a bourbon that stands out on itself from the rest of the bourbon category. So what we ended up on is a mash bill that is 51% corn, 39% rye, 10% malted barley.
Okay, hold on. Do me a favor. Say
Yep.
that again. I want to put that in the comments.
Yes. 51% corn,
51 corn,
39 rye,
39. Wow, that is a high rye. Yeah.
10% malted barley.
10% malted barley.
Yes. We wanted to do something that wasn't being done, especially in the high rye category for bourbon
Yeah.
that has been getting a lot of attention.
Well, that's
Um,
barely, I mean, that's barely a bourbon. I mean,
yeah,
that's
yeah, I joke around. It's a barely legal bourbon, and I don't mean that by like the age statement or anything like that. It is barely a legal bourbon.
wow. Okay, so okay, so this is, but it is definitely a bourbon. It is aged in, virgin oak casks. Okay.
Yep.
Uh, can you tell us how can you tell us the age, or do you not do an age on this one?
Nope. It is also a 5-year age statement.
Okay.
The mash, or I'm sorry, the maturation protocol is the same as the rye. So we're using that 3-year-old seasoned oak, medium toast, and then a level 4 char. Both the rye and the bourbon have no chill filtration, and this one is bottled at 104 proof.
Okay. So let's talk about that the barrels that you were just talking about there. So
Yeah.
so you came up with this obviously you experimented with different things, and the toast level and the char. Is that going to be something that Altamar will continue doing with high end wicked? Is this because
Yes.
it does seem to work. I have to tell you,
Yes.
we're getting good comments here. It seems to work.
Yeah, absolutely. We feel that this is part of the DNA of our bourbon and rye. It's, every part of the process of making a whiskey implement something into the overall flavor. Like I said, when you season oak in an outdoor environment that long, those microbes break down a lot of this tannin that's in the wood. When you do the medium toast, you're getting rid of even more of that tannin, bringing out a little bit more vanilla and nuttiness. Then with that heavy char in there, you're getting a lot more tobacco, dark chocolate that really presents
Oh,
itself
yeah.
nicely.
It's
Um,
very full bodied. I mean, very full bodied, very full
yeah,
flavored. There's nothing light about this. No,
no.
no, there's
And
nothing timid here. Is the rye in here the same grain that goes into the other rye?
it is, I don't believe so. And I think, again, that's part of the NDA, but it is
Okay,
the corn, the rye, and the barley for this one is all out of Kentucky.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is yeah.
And then I almost forgot a crucial part.
Yeah.
What also makes this a little bit more dynamic that you really don't see on the shelf in the world of bourbon is that this is a sweet mash recipe. And that was done to balance out the high rye profile. And again, gives you a lot more body, that creaminess, the viscosity of it.
Hey, can
It
you talk?
does,
Okay, for the people who aren't in the know, can you talk a little bit about that? Because obviously, like places like Michter's are very forward with the fact that they're doing the sour mash. Okay, and here you
yeah,
mentioned the sweet mash. Can you talk about that a little bit?
yeah, definitely. So sour mashing is honestly the most common style of mashing that you see in whiskey overall. And essentially what that is that after you have a distillation run, you're taking some of that backset, some of that spent grain that is very acidic, and then you're adding it to the new mash for the next distillation run. The reason why you do that is because it helps kill off any off-putting bacteria that could actually spoil your mash and gives you a much more consistent flavor profile for your brand. Sweet mashing, a lot can go wrong because you don't have that acidification in your mash. So there is a crucial imperative attention to detail that goes into it because you can completely ruin your entire batch of whiskey, hundreds of barrels, if your protocols are not correct.
Okay. Okay. Got it. So that's one of the reasons why before you mentioned that it was so important with New Riff, for instance, that you liked how clean the distillery is.
Yes.
Yeah, see, I'm listening. I'm listening. I try to pay attention. It's tough when I'm paying attention and working through all this stuff and drinking delicious drams at the same time. But that's
I
important.
mean, yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of information with our brands. Again, transparency is key. Like part of our company, we stand on three pillars. It's the production of the whiskey, the distillers, and the home place. We feel like that's what you need to build the story of a brand, not some just bullshit marketing scheme. So there is a lot of info to throw out all at one time.
Okay. So one thing that was mentioned in your bio is that you're a big fan of discussing the terroir of your whiskeys. Okay.
Yes.
And so going back for a second to the Irish. So the story of terroir there is weird because you're taking a French corn and bringing it over to Ireland and aging and finishing it in a barrel from Barbados. So I don't know how much terroir actually fits in with that particular bottle's story, although it definitely is an Irish when you taste it, from the
Yeah.
distillation. But these other two, are you using as much like local, like water, local wood, local grains as possible when you're trying to do this? Are you trying to get that out of these things?
As much as we can. Again, like when it comes to the wood for the barrels, we're going to Independent Stave Company uh, because they're just really outstanding at what they do. We love their process when it comes to creating a barrel. Again, it was all about that environmental interaction with the wood for the seasoning. Um, and then, yeah, again, the rye and the whiskey are both 100% distilled, aged, blended in Kentucky.
Got it. Wow. Yeah, I'm loving these. So let's before we open it up for questions, I want to make sure I understand about the core range of whiskeys from Altamar for High and Wicked. Okay,
Yeah.
so you said that the Irish is not necessarily part of your core range at this time. What about this rye and this bourbon? Are these going to be part of your core range?
Yes, these are core range. These are going to be available year round. And then we also have cast strength versions of both that will be available twice a year. And then when you get into what we call this singular limited releases, so like our Irish whiskeys are going to be something that's continuously evolving. So when the Irish whiskey first launched, our first mark was Wild Rover, which was an Irish single malt. Uh,
So somebody in the comments right now, in the comments, somebody wrote, "Do all your Irish come from the same distillery? The Wild Irish Rover is awesome."
they do not. The single malts where Noel is working with some people over at Royal Oak Distillery. But the single grains, again, are an NDA, so we can't really talk about who's producing them.
Okay.
But yeah, that Wild Rover was phenomenal. And then our follow up to that was Aeneas Coffee, named after the Irish exciseman who created the coffee column still.
Oh,
Because we thought,
coffee,
okay,
Coffey, right?
yeah,
Okay.
because it just kind of blew our mind that the guy who created, the most efficient method of distillation actually did not have a whiskey named after him at this point. Um, then we followed that up with the Foursquare release that you guys all tried tonight. Coming up next, we're going to have one called Rose Tattoo, and that will be another single malt finished in Amarone cask.
Oh, wow.
And then, yeah, and then if you're lucky, if you can still find them out there, there are a few floating around. Noel was very kind to us and gifted us 3 barrels of his own personal single malts that he
Okay.
distilled for himself. These were 18, 19, and 20-year-old single malts, single barrels. that we labeled under the Saints and
Okay.
Scholars.
William Myers had some of it because he just wrote 18-year-old Irish. He knows about it. So, but by the way, are you in every state of the country?
Every state except for the Dakotas, I believe North Carolina and Hawaii.
So you are in Pennsylvania. You're in the Pennsylvania system?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because we have some, I'm from Philly originally, and I have some friends on here from Philly, and they want to know if you have any distribution in PA. So that's good. That'll make them happy. All right. So we're at quarter of eight right now. I'm gonna shut up a bit. I know that'll shock a lot of you. Eric, what questions do you have for Joe before we open it up to the group?
I guess I'll start with one question. You kind of almost touched on it when you're recapping which ones you have, but for the rye and the bourbon specifically, um, the 49.1 and the 52% ABV. So you mentioned that they're not cast strength because you have a cast strength version of it.
Yeah.
What was the decision on the proofing level to get it up to get it to that point, but not obviously getting it down lower to, like a 46 or any of that?
Rigorous blind tasting. We had multiple samples that went all the way from 40% up to cast strength. And then we sent them out to multiple sommeliers, buyers, retailers, bar owners, mixologists, and basically everything came back to, for the bourbon, it came back to the 52%. Essentially, it always came back and like that was usually number one, and then the number two option was usually the 50% ABV mark. And because most people like the 52, that's ultimately what we went with. Same process for the rye, except it's kind of a funny story. The director of brand education, when he was sending out all these proofing samples, his name's Brandon Cummins. He's the person who essentially created the Hein Wicked brand and recipes. He mislabeled the 100 proof for the rye when he sent it out. And everyone came back and just loved the 100 proof. The 100 proof all the way, 100% unanimous agreement. So he goes back and he goes to check his math. He rechecks the proof and it came back at 49.1. And he's like, something must have been wrong there. So he's like, all right, this is what I'll do. I'll do another 49.1 and another one that's 100 proof, send them back out to all the same people blind and wait for them to come back to me. Again, everyone came back 100% unanimous, 49.1.
And that's such a small difference. That's incredible.
Such a small difference.
Wow.
But twice, everyone chose the 49.1.
Wow, that's amazing.
And by the way, it turns out that Adam Kamen from Off Premise was one of the retail testers here. That's awesome. That's great. All right, Eric, do you have any other questions, or should we open it up to the group?
Yeah, let's open it up.
Okay, so let's see, Eric, have they changed anything with the reactions here? It's like so remember everybody, to ask a question, you can go to your reactions tab and hit raise hand. If nobody has any questions, I'm gonna start picking on people. So you better be careful. Let's see here. Actually, Becca, I have a question for you, Becca. So as a PhD, you're a microbiologist, is that right? Please unmute, Becca.
I took microbiology classes, but it's molecular biology.
Molecular biology. Okay. So, how happy were you when Joe was talking about a clean lab and a clean distillery?
Well, that's important in my world, especially of medicine and so on right now. So
did either of you watch Breaking Bad?
I did
I
not.
I have watched some of it.
Oh
Yeah.
God, there's this amazing scene in Breaking Bad about essentially somebody abusing other people for not having any respect for their work by working in a filthy lab. cooking meth in filthy conditions. And it's, Joe, when you're talking about how clean New Riff was, it just reminded me of that whole scene where they had to scrub down the entire, meth lab in order to make it clean so they could get something good out of it. So yeah,
I
that
mean,
that just
if you want consistent results, you gotta have a clean start. So,
yeah, that's for sure. Awesome.
or be consistently dirty.
Or be consistently dirty. How do you do that? Yeah, that's different. Anyway, so thank you, Becca. I just wanted to put you on the spot there because I know
Thank
that
you.
you're a scientist. So William
But
Myers.
I was
Yes,
happy to
yes,
see
Becca.
that I was happy to see that you're in Massachusetts because I am relocated from Chicago to Massachusetts, and often we have whiskeys here that I can't get in my neighborhood. So Massachusetts seems to be a hard place sometimes to get into.
Oh,
Yep.
that's
And
great.
then on our main website for Altamar Brands, we do have a listing of all of our distributors in every state as well.
Oh, nice. Nice. That's convenient. That's great. Awesome. Mr. Myers, if you
Yes.
could do me a favor. All right. So you're unmuted. So it seems like you've been drinking this stuff for a long time. Am I right about that?
Yeah. So I used to do this. They had me doing this monthly whiskey column for St. Louis Magazine, which was great, but also the bane of my existence because they wanted like a certain format, like hot topic or hot like insider tip. And I'm like, look, there's not a whiskey bar opening in St. Louis every month, right? If there was, it'd be a lot easier. But one of the good things was I could review things, but they had to be available in the local market. So the thing is, like the in Wicked, it's cast strength. It is 58.7, and it's Irish. I believe it's single malt finished in PX.
Oh, so
And
that's the one that you and
yeah,
you and Joe were talking about earlier, right?
it's
Yeah,
delicious.
the Wild Rover.
Wild Rover. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Also,
Wow.
I'm impressed. Do all the ryes come from the same place as well?
Yes.
Because I've got so like with the judge, like I've got the judge, which is really nice, and I'm tempted to get the jury. But these are not new riff because they're too old.
Correct. So those are actually Tennessee bourbons.
Okay.
Yeah, those we started bottling, sourcing and then bottling as we're waiting for our core expressions to come of age. So the way that those started was you had the Honorable, which was a 12-year Tennessee bourbon, 52%, if I recall correctly, that was finished in cab sav barrels. And the reason for that was because we felt that while there was a lot of richness to the spirit, it was lacking some fruity dynamics to it that, that was just coming off a little too one note. So we wanted those cab sav barrels to, again, bring out those fruity elements in the whiskey, brighten it up a little bit more. After that, we had the Judge, which was a 14-year, 52% finish in Hungarian Tokai.
Which
That
it drinks like that. There's this. We were in Austria. I think it was Austria. No, it's an Austrian dessert, but we had it in Barcelona when my daughter was there for a semester. It's like it's got a name for it. It's a dense chocolate tort of a cake that has like a thin layer of like apricot jam or something like that. It's got a specific name that I'm forgetting. But this is kind of reminiscent of that.
Okay.
It's really good.
That's good to know. Yeah, anyone that's not familiar with Tokai, Hungarian dessert wine, drinks a lot, very similar to Sauternes. So really big floral honey notes to it, a little bit of a light spice to it, if you will. And again, we felt that was just, how often do you see a whiskey finish in Tokai barrels, especially when it comes to an American whiskey?
No, not that frequently.
Did you also say where the bourbon is from?
I can't, but it is out of Tennessee.
Okay.
That means that he's already going to look to his notes and try to figure it out. And yeah, I know you're going to do your own process of elimination.
Oh, there's not that many.
So I'll give you a hint. For the Tennessee ones, the double-digit age ones, the mash bill is on the front label. So if you take that mash bill and you just do a little googly goog, you'll be able to figure it out.
Awesome.
I
And
love it.
then
That's
after
great.
that one, the last one in the series was the jury.
Jury.
And that was a 15-year finish in Madeira wine barrels. And that was actually almost didn't happen. So during the aging process on that, we wanted to, the idea was to release judge and jury at the same time. Kind of like, a little side by side. Ooh, you've got the judge, you got the jury kind of thing. So we let it go for an extra year. And we went back to tasting the barrels and it sucked. It was very over oaked. And yeah, we thought we lost the barrel. So we went to an industry friend of ours, Maggie Campbell. She used to be the master distiller for Privateer Rum out of Massachusetts. She's now I think it's the distillery manager for Mount Gay Rum down in Barbados, but trusted friend. And we went to her and we're like, how do we save this? What do we do? She's like, well, when did you try them? She's like, well, we tried them in April. She's like, okay. So, or no, I'm sorry, we tried them in October. She's like, okay, so this is what you do. You let them go. You just let them go another 6 months, come back to them in the spring. Or like, okay. And essentially what happened was when we tried the liquid, it was at the end of the summer, and there was this huge contraction of all the extra tannin in the wood that just made it come off completely over oaked. So we let it settle during the cooler months when the woods re-expanded, and then tried it again. And it was just a night and day difference.
Wow.
And then from there, we sent the barrels up to Kentucky, dumped them, transferred them to Madeira wine casks, and then let them go a little while longer for the finishing.
Wow. That's an amazing story. It's like people like her who can just ask the right questions and say, all right, try this. And then
Yeah,
it works.
it works.
Yeah.
Part of it is knowing the
That's incredible.
chemistry. Like I had I did an article about taking vodka and finishing it with like raspberries, blackberries, blueberry lemon, right?
Mm.
And raspberry was great, blueberry lemon great. The blackberry just was not good. And I was really disappointed because I like blackberries. So I reached out to Dave Wondrich, right?
Okay.
I also had to come up with cocktails to go with these, right? Which was pretty easy for the other two. And he came up with the idea of mixing the blackberry vodka with this infused vodka with Drambuie, which I would have never
Interesting.
do. And it just came alive. It was awesome. I'm like, you're amazing.
Yeah, it's just wild how you think you have something lost, and it's like, no, it just needs this one other element or just that little bit of extra time, and it just completely changes it.
Got it.
I mean,
So,
the raspberries rocked. I mean, they're not that. I mean, one's like dark purple, one's red. I mean, they look pretty very similar. So, but not.
all right, great. So, does anybody else have any other questions? Because I got one or two more questions for Joe before we adjourn to the after party. Anybody else? Okay. All right. So, Joe, I do have a question for you. So, we're
Yeah.
talking here. We're drinking these all neat. Some people might be adding a little bit of water, stuff like that. Do you are you also like a cocktails guy, or are you pretty
I
much
am.
a straight liquor guy?
No, I got into enjoying whiskeys and spirits as a whole almost backwards. I started off as a cocktail guy. So
Okay.
yeah, definitely love cocktails.
Okay, because I have one question for you about that. So, when you had so this rye, and this bourbon, I mean, these are really full flavored. I mean, they got a ton in them, And a bartender who I was chatting with once told me that he likes to make cocktails with lighter spirits, so that they don't overwhelm the other ingredients. Okay. Um,
Mhm.
and so I can see it go both ways, but I'm just curious, when you enjoy these, are you typically enjoying these neat, or do you also use them in cocktails?
I also use them in cocktails. The rye in particular, like I'm a big fanboy of a Sazerac. So using this rye and Sazerac just works absolutely beautifully. Um, I think the sweetness and the richness in the rye kind of gives you a little bit of a play off of cognac in a respect, especially in a Sazerac. For the bourbon, again, it's all about just trying to elevate the flavors that are already in the whiskey. Um, Keep it simple if you want, but I think like in a mint julep of all things, the bourbon
Oh,
plays
nice.
incredibly nice. Whiskey sours. There was one other one. Oh gosh, there was a I forgot what cocktail I did with the bourbon. I'll have to get back to you on it, but it turned out really, really well.
Got it.
But yeah, no, definitely. I mean,
Okay.
drink it how you like, but they definitely work in cocktails.
Got it. And do you do a lot of these Zoom sessions, or you do a lot of, or do you also do a lot of things in person too throughout the throughout your territories?
I try to do some things in person, not as much as I would like to. Um, I feel like Zoom kind of just works better with everyone's scheduling, especially in a dense market like Chicago.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible for people from the suburbs to get into the city and vice versa.
And yeah, that's what we have too with our group. It's we have some hybrid events, but in general, it's like the Zoom events where you're able to cast a wider net.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
you're able to get in touch with more people. So I get that. So all right, wonderful. So what I want everybody to do right now is I would like
Wait,
everybody.
Adam
Yeah,
has
Eric,
one
yes.
question.
Oh, we have a
Yeah.
question?
Adam,
Adam.
Thank you, Joe. Great stuff. Gil, thanks for the time. Um, cellar mash is a relatively new term for me. Now, the difference between cellar mash and sour mash?
Oh
Can
no,
you,
sweet mash.
oh, you were saying sweet mash.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought I heard cellar mash. My
No,
Oh
apologies.
he
no,
was saying
you're okay.
no. You must have heard him say sour mash, but it came to you as cellar mash, is what he said.
All
Yeah.
right, I'll mute myself again.
No, that's all good. It's all good, buddy. No worries. No. That's an important clarification there. So, all right. So, what I'd like everybody to do right now, actually, is I want everybody to unmute themselves, including you, Adam. I'd like everybody to unmute yourselves. If you are so inclined, pour yourself another dram. I'm actually going back to the Irish because, this is so easy to drink. It's such a delicious, light but fruity dram. I just love this. And I want everybody to join me in saying thank you and cheers to our special guest, Joe McEwan from Altamar Brands.
Cheers,
thank you.
Joe.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Joe.
Joe, do you have any final words for us before we turn off the recording?
I don't. Just thank you for letting me ramble.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you for rambling. It was wonderful. Everybody, please stay on. Thank you everybody for joining us. Eric, please